Chapter 2. This chapter looks at the omnipresence of media as representing the bombardment of a language of signs of lost significance. It suggests that meaning can only exist through juxtapositions, viewed and structured, as with dreams, through a subjective eclecticism. Chapter 2, Virtual Language. I am not fond of reading. I invented psychoanalysis because it had no literature. Freud. Yeg is taken at night, and its effects are much the same whether or not one is a tukano. A flashing light is soon seen, phosphenes emerge in blue and orange, the field of vision is shaken by sideways vibrations, large felines and serpents make their appearance together with staring eyes, often with double or triple outlines. These are the guardians of the Yeg universe, and the tukano, having long familiarity with these experiences, assign definite meanings to the elements they are made of. Circles are Yeg flowers or suns, and when concentric with a central spot are signs of impregnation or combined with arcs of women. Zigzag lines are also flowers, besides being songs and the fertile power of the Sun Father, while patterns of lozenges signify snakes. There is in all quite a dictionary of patterns they know of, out of which a world of meaning is formed, leading to further visionary experiences of more individual significance. The reason that everyone sees staring eyes, large felines, and serpents when taking Yeg must be another organizational function of the imagination, that it makes images out of its own sensations. F. Huxley, The I, p. 17. This account of entoptic visions induced through narcotics and given significance is not an isolated case, but to a great extent can be regarded as an universal part of human heritage. We make images out of all of our sensations, not only the hallucinatory and shamanistic ones, as we try to make sense of the world, be it mythological or science fiction, and manipulate it to suit our needs. As we invent new gods, we do not neglect to, or cannot help but, attribute to them our most basic instincts. In the popular mythology, the computer is a mathematics machine, it is designed to do numerical calculations. Yet it is really a language machine, its fundamental power lies in its ability to manipulate linguistic tokens, symbols to which meaning has been assigned. Winograd 1984, from Laurel p. 225. The image in art can be taken as a linguistic token of significance in the broad sense of a landscape of perception, and is dealt with by the organizational function of the imagination. Photography gave us representation as documentary, the sign as truth in a sense. Film and video have given us a self-contained multimedia language, the sign constructed into sentence and story. Reality has always been too small for human imagination. The impulse to create an interactive fantasy machine is only the most recent manifestation of the age-old desire to make our fantasies palpable, our insatiable need to exercise our imagination, judgment, and spirit in worlds, situations and personae that are different from those of our everyday lives. Perhaps the most important feature of human intelligence is the ability to internalize the process of trial and error. When a man considers how to climb a tree, imagination serves as a laboratory for virtual experiments in physics, biomechanics, and physiology. In matters of justice, art, or philosophy, imagination is the laboratory of the spirit. Laurel, 1989, p. 453. By the language of the arts we have extended reality by way of the imaginary. We have been taken through the realms of fantasy and to the heart of darkness. Death and pornography have come together in what could be regarded as a most powerful art form, the snuff movie, that is the antithesis of the conventionalist fantasy machine of Disney, and yet somehow a parallel when seen in the light of a new wave of commercial films such as Natural Born Killers and the revived critical acclaim of cult exploitation movies. An opening out of space, of time, and of morality as we recreate heaven and hell under the banner of entertainment for consumers that will always be tempted by the seduction of something more, something new, and the shock of the new. With the era of books, the trend away from active participation commenced. Recorded music, then radio, film, and finally TV accelerated the pace. Increasingly, entertainment became a thing you watched, not did. The experience was ever more distant from the individual, observing became something that was done remotely. The individual's state of consciousness was more passive. Feedback was not required. Entertainment became a pervasive part of society. It did not engage the mind because it was always there. This migration along the continuum of the entertainment experience, moving from active participation to passive observation with decreasing levels of feedback, has paralleled the evolution of society itself. For example, the movement from community involvement to secular survival, from self-determining, empowered individuals to the disempowered, from no boundaries and self-control to boundaries and being controlled, from collective vision to individual vision, from feedback for survival to survival against feedback. All these can be seen as parallels to the changing dynamic of entertainment and its relationship to society. R.C.Heal, Interactivity, Social Phenomena. In the virtuality of art, anything goes. Virtual arenas and virtual gladiators. Real transgressions of taboos are still sick and criminal, but virtual excess is in the domain of ideas and of art, so both entertainment and the very source of intellectual discourse. Film is truth at 24 frames per second, said Goddard, and text is truth in the time it takes you to read it, and painting in the time you see it in, and sound the time you hear it in. All are stored asynchronously as an association of ideas and images in the virtual space of the mind. Fantasies may constitute reality, but there are the constraints of consensus. Media, especially, with regards commercial viability, tend to find formulas. The novel, the magazine, the pop song, the film, etc. The formula for digital art is already set. The game, the commercial break, the magazine, MTV, there is always the question of degrees, but with the increasing march of consumerism, attention spans are not likely to grow. Digital information may exist in a theoretical exponential asynchronicity, but an individual consumer or creator does not. The new media are searching for new marketable formulas of expression. The age demanded an image of its accelerated grimace, something for the modern stage made with no loss of time. A prose kinema. Certainly not the obscure reveries of an inward gaze. Pound. In the aesthetic landscape, in a contemporary art perspective, the image is evolving and accumulating visual linguistic tokens. If we transcribe this to the digital environment, it is then not surprising that working in the multimedia language is referred to as authoring. It will allow an individual to create in the same way as an author at the typewriter, but it is unlikely that what is created, if we consider again Burroughs' prediction, will take the form of a novel or traditional narrative. To a novelist it might seem concentrated, to a painter diluted, to a filmmaker disjointed. We've been laboring under some cognitive illusion. Because some experimental fiction has led people to believe that fiction and interactive might cohabit, designers have been led on a snipe hunt. The illusion is that there is some extraordinary new narrative structure out there waiting to be discovered that will make multiple outcome narratives work. Don't hold your breath. M. Backus, Hollywood and Silicon Valley. Here the notion of working is applied in the commercially exploitable sense of mass production formatting. It is unlikely that new narrative structures will be discovered, but it is likely that abandoned forms might find they are in for a revival in the context of a new medium. For example, the forms of an oral tradition. We have been experimenting with narrative structures since language began. Artists are perhaps always on a snipe hunt. If we think of Queneau's, milliards de poems, and the hypothetical millions of years required to read it, we have a minuscule representation of the Borgesque labyrinths of the potential data universe. It is well beyond containment on the human scale, and navigating in hyperspace becomes an interminable space of mirrors reflecting mirrors. But so is the real world, and we humanize the infinite scale by being eclectic according to our sensibilities. This is the nature of our understanding and invention. The creative force of a multimedia hypertext might better be defined as a poesy kinema rather than a prose kinema, and follow the more flexible forms of poetry as represented by Pound, for example, in his cantos and his theories of imagism. Pound's theory of the image is not simply a postulate of form or style, but a theory of generative and dislocating force, in a sense a theory of translation or better transcription. The image, by which he means the poem as a condensation, defines stylistic precision as an objectification which overthrows the aporia between two senses of figural language, between trope as visual representation and trope as displacement, between form and force. Metaphor as analogy or as symbolism, that is, interpretation that translates, displaces, transcribes, a metaphorics that disturbs the theory of the metaphor. Riddle, decentering the image. If we think that the notion of a digital online archive can become a public domain cyberspace of universal memory, filled out with virtually everything, we can envisage a vast poetic memory that can furnish all the virtual signs necessary to reconstruct any particular poetic vision. Whales are purported to have a longer history than man, stretching over several tens of millions of years. If so, their songs could include the feelings of whales of ancient times. Their singing customs and attitudes towards the world, passed down from generation to generation, may be accumulated in their songs, just like the writings and visions of human beings. Their song may have a past, a present and a future simultaneously, as a built-in order. The future form of visual art. An imaginative speculation on the poetic accumulation of memory, with an organic and open-ended breadth of significance that on a human level is an idea similar to the Jewish Kabbalah. The most complex mysticism praxis with the most complex language I know of is the theoretical Kabbalah, a technique for exercising reason or instructions for use of the human intellect. It is said that the angels gave the Kabbalah to Adam after being expelled from the Garden of Eden as a means whereby to return there. Wolf. The 10 Sephiroth with their 22 connecting pathways constitute a sheer inexhaustible, network-like reservoir of associations, connections, punctuations. Its construction principle is binary and it is built of the basic tensions of theoretical reason, chokmah, and the power to concretize, to form, bina. The only meaningful mode in which the Kabbalah can be read and re-revealed over and over again is that of interpretation. In this the Kabbalah and art are akin. Zielinski, 7 items on the net. All languages living and dead. All faces, places, and styles will be there in the digital, virtual supermarket of signs, all experience translatable at the push of a button. From science fiction to the prehistoric, we will have all the signs of an immense non-exclusive culture only hinted at in the disjointed meanderings of Pound's cantos. Everything is summed up in a logistic which integrates all the perceptual domains in a way even more undifferentiated than before. Everything is now received in a manner that is indistinct, virtually indistinct, in fact. Baudrillard, vivisecting the 90s. Not only a continuous accumulation of everything but also a continuous distillation of an everything that is infinitely interchangeable and manipulable, and perhaps even the esoteric means of a return to the garden. In order to navigate we will have to follow, without faltering, the guiding star of the Godhead as it shines as the faith, and the song, in our hearts as we march ever onward, as to war, to fulfill the mapping of our righteous destiny. The image, Pound wrote, may be defined as an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. As a complex the image would constitute a kind of mapping, and thus a figural displacement, of its mental object. But the image has no object as such. It displaces time linearity, and succession, into a figural space, a moment of time, producing a formal mirage. The unconscious has no time, nor any object. It is displaced as time, as consciousness, and thus as a movement of images. Time therefore does not represent, but is presented as the explicit, and explicatory, movement of language, its presencing/absencing. Time is a play of figure. The poem as figure. The poem as image then, can translate only by constellating this play of images. Pound's psychological metaphor for the image as complex anticipates the deconstruction of Freud's unconscious as a term for presence or non-difference, and the dream work as a mise-en-scene of writing. The complex is image of differences known only in the play of translations. The complex is translation and interpretation of symptoms, signs, and not of experience. The image is a layering of other signs or texts. Riddle, decentering the image. In the Imagist lexicon there are 3 terms that correspond to the 3 tenets of imagism. Phonopoeia that suggests the play of images, melopoeia of sounds and logopoeia of meanings or ideas. In phonopoeia the images are thrown not intended. The visual exists as a play of differences that disenters any imagistic representation, the throwness of images over one another. It is like a graph or a mapping of memory. Pound gives priority to the image as hieroglyphic writing, and the graphic play that is therefore opened up. Here we have an exact parallel to the way we receive and incorporate images of any kind, but most obviously in the context of the media in general and of television in particular. One of the aspects of multimedia and the most important of virtual reality is that of interactivity. Interactivity, trivial and non-trivial. The first is a closed system with a finite set of elements. The second is open-ended and infinite in its capacity to accommodate new variables. Ascot, interactive terminology. The phanopia of television, Virilio's Museum of Accidents, tends to fall into the first of these two categories, at least with the advocates of the virtual. An imagist approach to multimedia, however, could allow for a phanopia, through random and interactive elements, that represents an extremely rich territory of creative exploration. The image could become, in the projected reality of cyberspace, a radiant node or cluster, an evolving vortex, a form that resists any collapsing of differences into unity, even as it is transformed through open dialogue. The continuum is turning back on itself. We are going full circle. We have become increasingly uncomfortable with the comfort we once desired and created for ourselves. Society is moving to an age of virtual community, towards self-determination and empowerment, to reclaiming control and breaking down the boundaries, to reawakening our collective vision, and assuring survival through feedback. Entertainment must reflect our regained consciousness. Through the interactive factor now available, the opportunity exists for us to reclaim active participation. R.C.Heal, Interactivity, Social Phenomena. In Flaubert's words, I have got indigestion from books. I burp in folio. Or if we consider the connection between seeing and defecation, Levi Strauss, Bodily, with digital tools we will be able to evacuate and recycle the constipation of images once the appropriate plumbing is in place. Let us hope the bowels of communication can evacuate, through the partaking of this virtual roughage, before the foie is too grass and explodes. Let us hope that we can sustain and encourage a healthy social preoccupation with the scatological. Metaphorically and virtually, that is.